Hello again, everybody. This is Dan Clouser, and welcome back to the Journey of My Mother's Son podcast. And I'm still on location here in Aberdeen, Maryland at the Ripken Experience, and don't have a former All-American player with me, but I have the official historian and secretary of the All-American
Girls
Players Association. So, Merrie Fidler, thanks for joining me. Tell me a little bit about, so yesterday when we were talking, you said you were actually born the final year of the league, so you never played. But how did you end up getting involved with, being the secretary of the Players Association, and what does that entail?
Well, the first part is a little bit of a long story. I was a PE major, and I got a job at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst in 1970, and I found out that they had a sport history master's degree program, and that really appealed to me, so I enrolled in that. And one of the classes I took was American Women in Sport, and I had to look in the Reader's Guide to Periodic Literature for all the articles I could find about American women in sport. And I ran across a little 3-inch long article in a 1943 Time magazine about Mr. Wrigley creating this All-American Girls Professional Softball League. Well, I'd played softball my whole life and never heard about it.
Right.
But I was from California, and the league existed in the Midwest, so it was somewhat understandable. But anyway, I asked one of my friends who was a doctoral student in sport history at the time how I could find out more about this league. And he suggested that I write to the League City newspaper sports editors. And so I did that, and Joe Boland from the South Bend, Indiana Blue Sox wrote me back and said, well, what you need to do is contact Gene Fout-Winch, who I found out later was one of the best overhand pitchers in the league. And in 1943, Wrigley started the league as softball because that was his talent pool. But he kept the larger ball and the shorter pitching distance because that was his talent pool. But all the other rules of the game, even at that time, were baseball rules.
Right.
And so I contacted Jean Fout and asked if I could stop and visit her on the way back from California at Christmas vacation. And she agreed, and she was very gracious in bringing other people who still lived in South Bend who had been involved in the league. There was a chaperone, a former coach, a former business manager, and 3 other players. And we spent an afternoon talking about the league together. And the coach, his name was Chet Grant. He worked at the Notre Dame Sports and Games Collection and invited me to come and see the stuff he had on the league there. And I did that, and in the course of conversation, he said, well, what you really need to do is contact Arthur Meyerhoff, who had been Wrigley's advertising agent and helped promote the league. And he also bought the league from Wrigley in 1945 and ran it as league commissioner through the 1950 season. And I said, well, how would I contact him? He said, oh, I have his contact information.
Wow.
So I contacted Mr. Meyerhoff, and that next Easter vacation, I went down to San Diego and interviewed him. And during the course of the interview, he said, well, what you really need to do is go to my office in the Wrigley Building in Chicago and go through my All-American files. So it wasn't that summer, but the following summer I was able to do that, and I spent a week at his desk in his office with his secretary bringing me file boxes up, making copies of anything I wanted copies for, and letting me take a copy if there were more than one. And and I forgot to say that when I was at Gene's at Christmas time, She had 9 3-inch wide binders of league and team board meeting minutes, newspaper articles, pictures, just a treasure trove of material. And I told her, well, I really couldn't do anything with all of that material in a weekend. Would she let me take those with me? And bless her heart, she didn't know me from Adam, but she trusted me to take those with me.
That's pretty cool.
Well, with her materials and what I got from Mr. Meyerhoff, of course I was working full-time and taking master's degree classes. But over the period of the next 4 years, I went through all of that stuff and wrote my master's thesis on it. And that was called The Development and Decline of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. And then of course, during the period of time, I had also become acquainted with some other players, a few other players. Some Gene referred me to, and some I just kind of accidentally encountered. And one of those players was June Pepys, and she worked in a printing company, or she owned a printing company. And she wrote and asked if it would be okay if she'd made copies of my thesis to give to some of the other players. And I said, well, sure. And I was able to go to the first reunion in '82 in Chicago because it was in the summertime. And I was able to go to the reunion at the Baseball Hall of Fame when they opened the Women in Baseball exhibit.
Okay.
But other than that, I was teaching and coaching in the fall when the players had succeeding reunions, and wasn't able to go again till 2003 when I retired from teaching.
Okay.
And while I was there, some of the board members who had gotten copies of my thesis, some of the Players Association board members, encouraged me to get my thesis published. And one of the trips we made during that reunion in '03 at Syracuse was to visit the Hall of Fame. So I talked to the librarian there and asked them what publishers would I contact if I wanted to see if they would publish my thesis. Mm-hmm. And they recommended 3 or 4. And one of them, McFarland Publishers, at the time specialized in women's history and sport history. And I thought, well, that sounds like a good combination. So I submitted my thesis to them, and they agreed to publish it.
That's cool.
And I was able to get it published in 2006. And for the book, I updated it some, and I added some chapters about the players and what do I want to say? The Players Association. Gotcha. Because by then, of course, the movie had come out, the players had gotten recognized, and they went to a lot of events and were able to accomplish quite a number of things. Yeah. And
so your thesis, unknowingly at the time, turned you into a published author.
Right.
So I don't think we actually mentioned the name of the book yet. So
no, the name of the book is The Origins and History of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League.
Awesome. And if somebody wants to buy that.
And if they want to buy that and they can't find it on Amazon, contact the publisher, McFarland Publishers in North Carolina. And they can, Jefferson, North Carolina, and they can get it from the publisher for sure.
Cool.
And then, after I went to a few more reunions and got my book published, in 2007, some of the board members says, well, why don't you run for the board this year? And I thought, well, you know, I really love these people. And I love this organization, so I did. And then they made me secretary.
Was that one of those meetings that you missed where you then came back and found out you were now secretary? Or we all know how that works sometimes. Mary's not here; she's going to be secretary from now on.
No, it was an actual association election, membership election. So, and I've been secretary ever since because I love it, and. And I know a lot of the history that the players, like some of the players don't know.
You did all this research and you kind of had probably some visions of what these women were like, and then to meet some of them.
Yeah.
What was that like?
It was amazing. During the first reunion in Chicago, my mom and I went, and we got all registered and everything, and of course the players were coming in and getting registered too, and it was so fun to watch them come in, and they'd be looking at name tags, and they'd see somebody that they hadn't seen for 30 years, and they'd say, "Oh, Dottie!" and give each other a big hug. You know, it was just great. And to Mr. Wrigley's credit, he was insistent that the players he recruited be good people as well as good ball players.
Yeah, isn't that really what sport is supposed
and
to be about?
Yeah, and so, you know, there's always a few bad apples in every group, but there's very few in the All-American Girls Baseball League Players Association. They're all good people, and they're all really willing to help any way they can, and they're just, you know, like coming to this event. You know, they come out here and they spend all day in the hot sun watching ball games and talking to players and having pictures taken with players and signing autographs. You know, it takes special people to do that.
It does. That's, you know, like I had said to Gloria in my last podcast, and to Maybelle and Shirley in the podcast with them. I mean, to see these women interact with these young girls, you know, it's not a show. It's not, you know, they don't really technically have anything to gain from it other than passing it on to this next generation. So it is really cool to see that and see how genuine they are and how authentic they are, and they enjoy interacting with these young girls.
They do.
It's not just a show. It's not just an appearance.
And
it really means a lot to them.
And I'd say, you know, 99.9% of them would love to be here to see this and do all they could to promote it, continue to promote it into the future.
So as you were doing all this research and then, you know, became part of the Players Association, you know, again, when you first became part of the association, did you ever envision that one day you'd be sitting here in Aberdeen, Maryland, watching 50-plus girls baseball teams play at this incredible facility that we're at?
No, I really didn't. It didn't even occur to me, you know, because I grew up in the 40s and 50s and 60s where you couldn't play baseball because you were a girl. And in junior high, I was better than probably 3/4 of the boys that were out there playing. But at that point, I could play with them on the playground, you know, at school and in the recreation department, but I couldn't be on a junior high team.
How'd that make you feel as a young girl?
Oh, I hated it. I just hated it because I grew up with a dad and two older brothers who all played baseball and who were rabid Yankee fans, and I listened to the games every night with them, and I went to the ball games every Sunday afternoon. And when I was 3, 4, and 5, you know, we just did that, and I grew up thinking, well, one day I'm going to be out there on that field playing, you know, and then to come to the point where you can't play because you're a different sex.
Right. Not because you weren't good enough.
Not because I wasn't good enough.
You couldn't throw hard enough. Simply because
I was female. So this is really heartwarming to me to see these girls playing. And I'll tell you what, I can envision in the not too distant future there will be another league of their own.
Yeah.
Because you get 500 girls playing. Next year it's 1,000. Where are they going to go after high school?
Right.
And so I think this is the foundation, the groundwork, and it's going to happen.
Yeah, and we know that again, one of your colleagues with the Players Association, Sue Zippe, is working on that very thing as we speak.
Yes.
One of the reasons she's not here right
is
now
because she's working
on
that.
She's so busy working on that. So I've never met Sue face to face. We've talked on the phone a couple times, exchanged some emails, but with not knowing a whole lot about her, I think if anybody's going to be able to pull off getting another league of their own, it will definitely be Sue.
She's a go-getter, that's for sure.
So hopefully, we can do another podcast sometime in the not too distant future, sitting in a spring training facility watching some professional women play baseball.
Yep.
That would be really cool.
That'd be good.
Now, if that happens, is there another book in order? The history of the new league?
Well, you never can tell if I live that long.
Yeah, there you go. Anything else that you want to add that we didn't talk about yet at this point?
I think we pretty much covered it. I would like to say that I give great credit to Mr. Wrigley and Mr. Meyerhoff for creating the first women's professional team sport in the U.S.
Yeah, and I think one way to put that into perspective is the struggle we still have today in 2021, getting girls on a baseball field. To do that in the 40s and 50s, that was pretty
something.
gutsy.
And it was not so unusual a thing to happen during the World War II years when men had to go to war and women filled in, and that's what Mr. Wrigley did. He had them fill in on the ball field. But after the war was over, the league existed for another 10 years. So it grabbed a hold of the fans in those cities, and they had good attendance.
Yeah, I think that's something I'd like to point out, because we talked about the movie and how accurate it was to real life, and we talked about yesterday how in the movie it almost seemed as at first people weren't coming to the games, but that actually wasn't an accurate portrayal, that people did come right off the bat, and it was good baseball.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Wrigley was very...
We got, just so my listeners understand all the screaming and yelling, we got a 7-7 game here in the
seventh inning.
So, we may have to pause for some screaming so people can hear us talking. But anyway, you were talking about Mr. Wrigley.
Mr. Wrigley was very insightful in getting the top businessmen in each of the league cities involved in donating to the team and being directors of the team, because he got the top businessmen involved. They brought in other people, and he established the league on the highest social principles of the day. And if he hadn't done that, those businessmen wouldn't have joined in to support the project.
Yeah.
So he was very...
I mean, let's face it, you need investment.
Right.
No matter what you're doing, what type of business venture you're doing, you need
And Mr. Wrigley put up half of the money, and the city businessmen had to put up the other half of the money for each of the teams. So he was very insightful in doing that.
That's awesome. So, as you know, I ask all my guests a final question. It's the subtitle of my podcast is Many Little People in Many Little Places, which comes from the opening lyrics of a song which go, when many little people in many little places do many little things and the whole world changes. So what's one of the little things that Merrie does every day to help make the world a better place?
Well, wherever I go and encounter people either close up or 6 feet away. I try to smile and say hi, look them in the eye and say hi. And with those who I'm close to in my community, I look for ways that I can help them out with anything, taking care of their pets or cooking something for an outing or, anything I can, because I think I try to be kind to people, is the main thing.
Cool. Well, appreciate your time. Love sitting here watching baseball with you guys.
Yeah.
For all my other for listeners out there, check out my other blogs and podcasts. Check out danclouser.com. Merrie, thanks again for joining me.
Well, thank you for asking
me. If we're coming down the coast of western U.S., we can swing in and give you a call.
Okay, you can park in my driveway.
Right.
I got a nice long driveway.
Perfect. That's what we like to hear. All right. Thanks again.
You're welcome.